You know, one of the things I just love about that song we just sang is, I just love that three-word, it's such a simple statement, man. It's just that three-word statement we repeat over and over again, so will I. And I love that statement because it's a statement of intent, of direction. It's a statement that requires some deliberation, right? Some will. It's a statement that says, man, God, if you're asking me and if you're inviting me to go this direction, I might not understand it all, I may not get it all right, but I'll go there. It's a statement really says, I'm going to own my life. I'm not just going to let life happen to me. I'm going to make decisions that lead me to the place, God, that I believe that you've invited me to go. And I love that this song, in a lot of ways, it's I'm not sure we intended it this way. It's kind of become a theme over the last several weeks of this series that we've been in called Own It. And what we've been talking about over the last several weeks is a really simple idea, is that it's possible to kind of drift through life. And all of a sudden you wake up one day and you realize you really didn't own your life. Life just kind of happened to you. And that's a great way to exist, but it's not a really good way to live. And so we just been talking about what it would look like to own our lives, to make decisions that are consistent with the kind of person we want to be, the kind of person God invites us to be. And so we started by just talking about if you're going to own your life, if you're going to be the kind of person who owns your life, we have to start with our friendships, like looking at the relationships around us. Because as we discovered, our friends determine the quality and direction of our life, so we need to own that. And we talked about the idea that we need to own our relationship with God and what that looks like. We talked about showing up here expectant, anticipating that God actually wants something for you, that God has a good purpose for you, to show up and say, man, God, I'm going to worship you because I believe you have something for me and what you've done for me is just full of love. So I respond in worship. Last week we talked about if you're going to own your life, you've got to move away from drifting towards selfishness. Because if you're not careful, man, we just drift into selfishness, and you have to make choices to live selflessly. And so today, I just want to wrap up our series by talking about one more decision I think that we have to make, one more invitation, one more so will I kind of moment that I think we need to make if you're interested in owning your life. You know, one of the things that strikes me when you read the New Testament, and in particularly the Gospels. And the Gospels are just the first 4 books in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And if you've never read the Gospels, man, I'm telling you, I cannot highly recommend it enough. Because as you read the Gospels, you just begin to pick up patterns. You begin to see themes sort of emerge and rise to the surface. Themes and patterns about who Jesus was and how he engaged people and the kind of people that he engaged. And one of the themes that you begin to see as you read the Gospels is that Jesus was all about sort of investing in people that everyone else, particularly the religious community, people that the religious community had kind of ostracized. People of the religious community said, no, they're not like us. They've got a past. They've got a history. They've got some sins. They've got some baggage. We don't associate with them. And these are the exact kind of people that Jesus loved to be around, and they loved being around Jesus. I love the way Andy Stanley says it. It's just so simple. He basically just says it this way, that when you read the Gospels, the one thing you can't escape is this, is that people who looked nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. And my guess is for some of you, that probably comes as a little bit of a surprise, a little bit of a shock. And the reason why is because your experience with Jesus, your only experience with Jesus up to this point has been his followers. You've had some interactions with a few of his followers. You haven't read the Gospels. You haven't really been to church much. Maybe you're just starting to come back for the first time. But you've had a lot of experience with followers of Jesus, people who said they were following Jesus. And your experiences with followers of Jesus did not leave you wanting more. It didn't leave you saying, man, I got to get in on some of that. In fact, some of you, the reason you hightailed it from church years ago, the reason some of you are skeptical about the whole Christianity thing, about the whole church thing, about the whole Jesus thing, it's not because of anything Jesus has done. It's not because of anything you've read about Jesus or experienced Jesus. It's because of Christians and some of the experiences you've had with them. But you cannot escape this reality that over and over and over and over again in the Gospels, you see that people who were nothing like Jesus liked him. And they loved being around him. And they felt at home with Jesus, and Jesus felt at home with them. Now, this one reality created a ton of tension. It created some conflict. It created some tension. And Luke, the writer Luke, gives us this window into this one scene that happens where Jesus has a crowd around him. And he's got some people who have been outcast by the religious community, who know that they have wandered far from God, who know that their sins and know their past. And then you've got some religious people, and you got them all together. And Luke gives us this little glimpse. He lets us dip in on this scene, and it is a fascinating little story. And it says everything about where Jesus wants to lead us. Look what it says here. This is in Luke chapter 15, verse 1. It says, tax collectors and other notorious sinners. And I love that phrase. I don't know what they were doing to be notorious, but apparently they were sinning right because they were notorious. So if you're going to do it, go big or go home. They were doing it, right? Other notorious sinners, they often came to listen to Jesus teach. Tax collectors were absolutely despised. And I won't get into all the details, but basically they were just thieves. They would take more than they needed. They were thieves. And then you've got notorious sinners, and they would come to listen to Jesus. No one made them. No one forced them. No one held a gun to their head. They wanted to be around Jesus. They loved being around Jesus. This did not sit well with everyone. Look what it says next. This made the Pharisees, and Pharisees were religious leaders. This made the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law complain. They're mad. They're upset. They complained that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. It's like, Jesus, come on, it's not enough. I mean, you can say hi, just, like wave at them, but why do you got to eat with them? Why do you got to associate with them? Why do you got to be with them? This gets the religious people really irritated, who Jesus is with. And I think one of the reasons that they're so worked up is because this is the impulse of religion every now and then. The impulse of religion is that when you just become religious and you kind of orient your life around religious rules and regulations, what you do is you begin to create barriers between who's in and who's out. You begin to draw really sort of clear dividing lines that, who's good and who's bad, who's sinful and who's righteous, who's in and who's out. And they begin to see the world in these categories, that those people don't believe like us, they don't think like us, they don't share our values, they don't behave like us, they are not one of us. We do not associate with them. We're in. And they couldn't figure out Jesus, and they were repulsed by what Jesus was doing. In fact, one place in the Gospels it says this, it says that the religious people pulled his disciples, his followers aside one day, and they just said, we need to ask you a question. Why does your teacher, Jesus, why does he eat with such scum? I mean, how dehumanizing. They can't even acknowledge these people who had sinned and who had a past and all that. They couldn't even acknowledge them as people. They're scum. And I would imagine that there's this question that is looming over this scene that Luke is letting us dip into here. There's this question that's kind of hanging over this moment. It's just kind of in the air. And the question is a really simple question. Why? Why would Jesus risk splitting this crowd up by doing this? Maybe a better question is this. Why would Jesus risk his reputation by choosing to associate with these people that everyone else had left behind? Why would he do that? And Jesus, I think he knows this question is kind of looming and kind of hanging over the crowd because Jesus speaks to this. And he answers it. And he answers it by telling a story that is a short, tiny little story, but man, it is so impactful. So this is what Jesus says. He replies to their complaining. He replies to their disgust. He says, he told them a story. This is what he says. Come here. Everybody listen. Everybody gather around. Let me tell you something. If a man has 100 sheep, let's just say a man has 100 sheep, and one of them gets lost, what will he do? What would he do? And he goes on, he says, won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go to search for the one that is lost until he finds it? Now, this is a rhetorical question. Everyone knows the answer to this because, everybody at that moment, they either knew a shepherd or they had a shepherd in the family and they knew that the economic stability of their families and communities were kind of based on something. So they were like, obviously, yes. The answer is yes. The person would go, the shepherd would go and do whatever it takes to find the one. Do whatever it takes. And Jesus is telling this story, and he's getting everybody's heads nodding because we've all felt, he wants to kind of bring up that emotion, that feeling of what it feels like to have lost something. And everyone's experienced that at some point or another where we've lost something. He goes on. He says, and when he's found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. And when he arrives back into the community, when he brings that one back to join the 99 others, he'll call together his friends and neighbors saying, rejoice with me because I have found my lost sheep. Jesus saying, man, like, wouldn't the shepherd pick it up, put it on his shoulders and bring it back? And the shepherd's not going to say, come on guys, here's the sheep. Let's beat this sheep. The shepherd's going to say, man, this is a moment to party. This is a moment to celebrate. The one was lost. It's been found now. So he's evoking these emotions. He's getting everybody's heads nodding because we've all lost something. And I think there's three things, just three little observations that are in this story that I think is, true to all of us, any of us who've ever lost something. If you've experienced losing something of value to you, you've felt this before. A couple little things I would just say. First of all, when you lose something of great value, what's unlost, yes, I know that is not a word, get over it, whatever. What is unlost is not as important as what's lost. That's always the case. Whenever you lose something of great value, what's unlost is not nearly as important in that moment as what is lost. He says he left the 99 behind. Why? Because they're good. They're found. They're home. Why would you spend energy? Like, the one is missing. I've told a couple of you, I told you before, some of you before, that a few years ago, I was hiking with my family. We were down south and we were hiking. And so me and Jenny, and then we had, I think Sienna was 10 at the time and Silas was 7 at the time. And we had a big group of family together. And so Jenny, and then we had Silas, and then we had an aunts, and we had cousins, and we had Mimis, and all the people like that. And Sienna and I decided we were going to go down this one trail separate from everyone else. So there's a big group, Jenny and Silas were this big group of family going down this one trail, and Sienna and I are going down another trail. We get to the end of the trail, and they kind of converge. They kind of come to the same ending place. And so we all get to the ending place, and we're all talking about what the hike was like, and, hey, what did you see, and how was the hike, and all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, someone, I don't know who it was, someone pipes up and says, hey, where's Silas? And he's not there. So we kind of look around, don't see him, we call out for him, no response. Then I go up 20 yards or whatever, I look around the corner, I don't see him. So I do what any of you would do, and I just start running up that mountain, up that trail to backtrack to see where he is. See if I got to go find him. And as I'm running, I've gone a quarter of a mile at this point, I haven't seen him. And as I get up this one part of the trail, I look over, and probably 2 to 3 feet over to my left, there is a straight incline, just a straight, almost a cliff, a straight drop off of about 40 to 50 feet. And I knew Silas was wearing a yellow shirt that day. And it's a miserable experience when you're running frantically up a trail, and every now and then you're just glancing down looking for yellow. I got about a half mile up that trail or so, and I come around this one corner, and I see Silas just taking his time coming down the trail. Not a care in the world. Now, do you know what Sienna was doing that whole time I was out looking for Silas? Yeah, neither do I. Because she's not lost. She's found. She's good. She's home. There's only one thing on my mind. And can you imagine if I had got back and I didn't find Silas for one reason or another, and I get back and I run back down and I see Jenny, I go, Jenny, bad news, listen. Couldn't find Silas. But we still have Sienna. Come on. You know that's funny. The reason you laugh is because you know that's true. Anytime we've lost something of great value, what is unlost is not as important as what is lost. I think there's a second thing from the story that Jesus tells, just true of any time we lose something. When you lose something of great value, you will go to great lengths to find it. If it's meaningful to you, if it matters to you, you'll go to great lengths to find it. Remember what he said in the story? He says the shepherd will go until he finds it. The idea is urgency. The idea is like this shepherd going out, turning over rocks and going around corners and moving, brush around to make sure that he does whatever he can to try to find this sheep. He's going to go to great lengths to find it. And if you know anything about sheep, whenever sheep get separated from the flock, they kind of just plant themselves down. They, in fear and in isolation, just kind of plant themselves on the ground. They will not move. They're stubborn little things. And so the shepherd finds the sheep, bends down, has to now stoop down and pick up this flea-infested, dirty, stinky sheep, put it on his shoulders, and walk the whole way back home now. It costs something, but you're willing to go to great lengths, aren't you, when you've lost something of great value? And that cost makes this last little observation even more remarkable. Because you've felt this, you've done this when you've lost something of great value. You know this, that when you lose something of great value, the effort spent looking pales in comparison to the joy of finding. Right? The effort spent looking pales in the comparison to the joy of finding. Jesus said that the shepherd joyfully, not begrudgingly, not rolling his eyes, joyfully, and brought it back to the community. Joyfully, and said, let's party. He did it with joy. And I would imagine that these first listeners who are listening to the story at this point are sitting there going, cool, Jesus, time out real quick. That's great. We love shepherds. We got it. You're a big sheep shepherd fan. So are we. That's awesome. But that's not what we're talking about. We're not upset about shepherds and sheep. What we're upset about is who you're hanging out with. What we're upset about, let's not get distracted here, Jesus. What we're upset about is who you're associating yourself with, who you're hanging with, who you're investing in. That's what we're upset about. And Jesus, so brilliant, explains this story. And he doesn't always do this. Sometimes Jesus just tells a story like this and says, y'all figure it out, you're good. But this one he explains. And what he says next is at the same time shocking to some in that audience that day and liberating for others. This is what he says next. He said, in the same way, just like that shepherd who left the 99 behind, just like that shepherd who was relentless to go in pursuit out into the wilderness, in the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. It's almost like Jesus saying, guys, you want to know? Do you really want to know the answer to your question? Do you want to know why I associate with them? Do you want to know why I invest my life in them? Why I invest my time with them? Do you want to know why? It's because I am here to reveal the heart of God to this world. I am here to show you who your heavenly Father is. I am here to bring about and to put flesh and blood on what God thinks about people and what God thinks about this world. I am here to run after and to show you what fires up the heart of God. And guys, do you want to know what fires up the heart of God? Jesus is saying, what fires up the heart of God is not the 99. They're good. They're found. They're home. What fires up the heart of God is the one who's still wandering, lost in the wilderness. It's almost like Jesus saying, how else could I respond to them? How else could I respond to them? And Jesus knows that there's actually other ways that you could respond to them. These religious people had probably several answers for that. How else could you respond to those people, Jesus? I know, well, one, you could respond to them with judgment. That's what we do. You could respond to them with disgust. You could respond to them with contempt. You could respond to them with fear. Pull back, isolate yourself. There's a lot of ways, Jesus, you could respond to them. Jesus says, but you don't get the heart of God. See, this is absolutely shocking because Jesus rips apart and tears down their categories about how he sees people and how we are to see people. He rips down these religious people's categories and says, you've seen people in all these different categories, but I only see people in two categories. There are only two ways I see people. Those who are loved by God and found, and those who are loved by God and lost. That's it. That is how I see everyone. That everyone is the object of God's relentless love, whether they have been found or not. That's how he sees every single person in your school. That's how he sees every single person in your family. That's how he sees every single person in your place of work. That's how he sees every single person in your neighborhood. It's the object of God's relentless love. And either they've discovered that or they have wandered from it, and they're lost. And as challenging as this must have been for these religious people to hear Jesus articulate this, I would imagine at the exact same time, this was life-giving to those who had been wandering from God. Can you imagine how liberating it must have felt to hear Jesus say these words? Because when you're lost and when you've wandered into the wilderness and you're lost, you know the only thing you care about, the most important thing that you have on your mind is anyone looking for me? Does anyone care enough to come after me? Listen, for some of you, you have been wondering because you know your past. You know that you have been running from God. Some of you, you identify, you know it right now. You have that feeling that you're wandering in the wilderness and you've run away from God. And you know what you've done, and you know the baggage you carry, and you know the shame over some of the things that you've done. You know all that. And some of you, because of that, you have been wondering if there is truly a God. Does he still love me after everything I've done? If there is truly a God, does he still want me after everything that I've done and how far I have run? Some of you have been wondering how God feels about your wandering. And if that's you, Jesus answers that question and looks you in the eye and says, you have no clue just how far God would chase you to win you back, to bring you back home. You have no clue. You are not a burden to God. He's not surprised by your past or your mistakes. But no. You have a God who would joyfully pick you up, put you on his shoulders, bring you home again. See, Jesus articulates so clearly to these religious people why they don't understand what he's doing. Jesus says, guys, you missed it. You missed it. You missed the point. You forgot the plot. You drifted into thinking it was about the 99. And it's never been about the 99 that are found. It's about the one who's still lost. Guys, listen, let me just tell you. You know what our greatest concern and fear is here as a church? This is something we talk about all the time as a staff. Our greatest concern and our greatest fear here as a church, it's not financials. We're diligent about that. We pay careful attention to the financials because we're going to do everything we can to honor God and steward the resources well. But that's not our greatest fear and greatest concern, where there's a recession hitting and what that's going to do to giving. Like, we're going to pay attention to that. That's not it. Our greatest concern, our greatest fear as a church, it's not whether or not one of our locations is going to burn down this week. What are we going to do with the building? Like, we're going to pay attention to that. We're going to make sure we're covering all that kind of stuff. But that's not our greatest fear and concern. Our greatest fear and concern here as a church is not what our next sermon series should be and whether that's going to connect with people and all that. All that's important. Our greatest concern and fear as a church is this: that we drift towards organizing ourselves and becoming content with the 99 that are here. And we forget about the one that is still wandering and lost in the wilderness. That we feel all good about ourselves because we all think alike and believe alike and all that, and we feel great, and we forget that there are still ones in the wilderness We dare not drift. Because if we do, we have strayed from the heart of God. And over 30 years ago, man, this church was started with one goal and aim. And the goal of this church wasn't over 30 years ago when it started. It wasn't the goal and aim then. It's not the goal today. It wasn't the goal to be a big church. That wasn't the goal. Wasn't the aim. It wasn't to have locations all across Pennsylvania. That wasn't the goal and the aim. We didn't even know that was a possibility. That would be on the horizon. That wasn't it. The goal and the aim when this church was started is still the same goal and aim today, and that is to join Jesus in the mission that he is accomplishing in this world, to join Jesus in going into the wilderness to seek out the one. To give ourselves to that. To see more people find hope and life in Christ. But this isn't just about our church. Because Jesus drives this home in a much more personal way. And he takes us another step further. Because after this little story in Luke, the disciples, his followers, they continued to watch him, how he continued to go into the wilderness after the ones. They saw him do this. They heard his stories. They saw the heartbeat of God lived out in flesh and blood in front of them in Jesus. And before Jesus left them, he gave them a couple of commands that are as striking today as they were then. This is in John 20. He says, as the Father has sent me, so I am what? Sending you. I'm sending you. Where? Into the wilderness. Why? Because there's one more out there. He says this in Matthew 28. Some of the last words he said to his disciples. He said, go and make disciples. Go. Leave the 99 behind. They're good. They're found. They're home. Go. And make followers, disciples. Go. Into the wilderness, because Jesus says, that's where I am. And these words that Jesus spoke, just to let you in on this real quick, he didn't speak these words to an organization. He wasn't saying these to an organization, some disembodied group. He wasn't saying these to a church. He was speaking these words to individuals. He was speaking these words to his followers. You, me. Sending us, saying to go. This is what it means to own it. We will not drift. You know where we'll drift if we don't pay attention? We will drift towards the 99, always. And Jesus is saying, I'm looking for a group of people who will own this mission, who will live like they are sent, who will join me out there, who will go, who will own it. And if that's you, man, if you want to own your life when it comes to the mission that Jesus has given you, has invested into you, I just think it's kind of simple. It just means two things. Invest and invite. Invest and invite. Invest and invite over and over and over again. If you want to own your life in this way, invest and invite. Go into the wilderness. Find one and invest in them. You know what invest means? It just means that you share your life with them. Someone maybe who's wandered far from God, someone who feels like they got a past, someone who feels like God's given up on them. You find them and you invest in them. You share your story with them. You listen to their story. You share meals with them. You answer questions. You ask questions. You challenge. You encourage. You pray for them. That's investing your life into someone. But not just that, man, invite them. Invite them what? Invite them here. Invite them to be a part of what God's doing here. Invite them to follow Jesus with you. Invite them to explore the life of Christ together with you. To join in here, to be a part of just saying, I don't know what it all means either, but let's do it together. Come with me. Let's explore this together. And look, I know for some of you, all that we've been talking about today, this is really personal to you. Because when you think about the one who's still wandering in the wilderness, still far from God, For some of you, it's very personal. You have a name and a face that has come to mind right away. It's a son. And it keeps you up at night. It's a daughter, or it's a dad, or it's your mom. It's a spouse. It's a lifelong friend. It's a coworker. For some of you, you know immediately who that one is that you can invest and invite. And then for some of us, let's just be honest, there's not really a name and face that comes to mind. And maybe the reason there's not a name and face for some of us is because you didn't mean for it to happen. And it certainly wasn't malicious on your part. You never even intended it for happen. But if just over time, you're only surrounded by the 99 now. You look around and it's only people who think like you and believe what you believe and act like you and share your values. And if that's you, man, I just want to challenge you. Maybe it's time to join Jesus in the wilderness again. To put yourself in situations where you can invest and invite. I have friends who, they started coaching a little league baseball team for this very reason. They know nothing about baseball. I'm telling you, these poor kids, they are probably the worst baseball players ever now. The reason they started coaching baseball was nothing to do with baseball. It's because they looked around one day and they realized, we're surrounded by the 99. We've drifted. We're not owning this. And it's time to own it. We've got to put ourselves back into the wilderness where we can bump into people who need some hope, who need to know that there's a God who loves them, so we can invest and invite. You know what strikes me? What strikes me much more than anything else about this story is that Jesus was willing to have his reputation ruined because he believed in this idea so much. He was willing to have his reputation ruined by those people who everyone else had cast out. The people who were wandering in the wilderness, he was willing to have his reputation ruined by them. And what strikes me about that is this. If you're trying to start a religion, that's a horrible way to do it. If you're trying to start a religion, the best way to do that is to get all the religious people on your side. If you're trying to start a religion, the best way to do that is to get all the religious people happy. If you want to start a religion, just hang with the 99. But that's not what Jesus was trying to do. He wasn't trying to start a religion. Jesus told us why he came. In Luke 19, he said, I'll tell you why I came. I came to seek and save the lost. People out there in the wilderness who've wandered far from God. And I'll do that even if it means they ruin my reputation. And do you want to know something? I'll be honest with you. The day that I became a follower of Jesus, I ruined his reputation all over again. Because I know how far I had wandered. I know how deep in the wilderness I was. I knew that I didn't even know how to give words to it. I just knew that I needed grace from somewhere outside of myself. I knew that I needed peace from somewhere outside of myself. I knew that I needed purpose from somewhere outside of myself. And on that cold November night, 1998, I'll never forget it. Jesus stooped down, picked me up, threw me on his shoulders, and he carried me home. And nothing's been the same since then. And do you want to know part of what unlocked all of that for me? Part of what unlocked that moment, it wasn't a book that I read. It wasn't a message that I heard. It wasn't the answer to some philosophical question I had been wondering about faith. It wasn't it. Do you know one of the keys to unlocking all that for me? It was a couple. It was Joseph and Irma Chan. Because Joseph and Irma looked at me, a wandering, aimless, lying, womanizing, cheating, lost college student. And they took me into their home. And they invested in me. And they sat down and they listened to my story. And they shared their story. And they did not judge me, but they loved me. And they kept pointing me to Jesus and pointing me to Jesus. And I am so grateful that they left the 99 for this one. Because they could have been doing a million other things with the 99 on those evenings. But they lived like they were sent. They went. And I hope one day, man, I want this so bad for you. I hope one day you get the inexpressible joy that comes that when someone shares their story of being found, when someone talks about how they were lost and wandering and running from God in the wilderness, but then Jesus picked them up and brought them home, when they share that story being found, they talk about you. They mention your name because you kept investing and inviting and investing and inviting and investing and inviting, and everything changed because of that. Guys, listen, the movement is still moving. Movement's still moving. Jesus is still bringing hope and life and grace and love and forgiveness and peace and purpose into this world. Jesus is still running into the wilderness, chasing after the one. And Jesus is still inviting you and inviting me to take him up on this mission, to own it, to own the mission that he's given us and say, we will leave the 99, Jesus, just like you did for us. We will leave the 99 to go after the one. He is looking for men and women like me and like you to join him in the wilderness again, who will pursue the one. Would you stand with me? Just at all of our locations, just stand. Let's sing in response to this God who left the 99 for us and calls us to follow him into the wilderness out of love and care and concern for those that he's called us to. Let's sing.